I'd like to review with you very quickly the cranial mechanism and its movement, or more specifically, the two bones that are responsible for the movement of the cranial rhythmic impulse, which are the occiput and the sphenoid. Now we know that the cerebrospinal fluid and the entire venous drainage system is pumped and activated by this cranial mechanism, this internal rotation and external rotation of the cranial bones. These cranial bones are driven by the occiput and the sphenoid. So we have two phases: internal rotation or flexion and external rotation or extension. So the occiput, which is a curled or rounded bone, and we remember that since form determines function, the movement of the occiput is also going to be somewhat of a curled or rounded motion. So when the occiput goes into flexion or internal rotation, it's going to move inward in a curling kind of direction towards the brain stem. When it comes into extension or flexion, it's going to move back outward and towards you. Similarly, the sphenoid is also a bone that moves in relation to its shape, and it moves upward and downward. So when it goes into flexion or internal rotation, it moves downward and inward towards the temples of the baby. And when it moves into extension or external rotation, it's going to move upward and outward. So what we have essentially are two bones that come together in internal rotation or flexion, and outward and apart in external rotation or extension. If I were to exaggerate those movements on the newborn baby, we would have our hands very much at the base of the occiput. So we know that our occiput is approximately here, right? So we want to have our hands, our fingers, our contact point at the base of the occiput, not at the back of the head here. Here we have the occiput that is contacting and interacting with the parietals. So the occiput is not in the back of the head here. The occiput is at the base down here. So we're going to have our baby's head contact our fingers at the very base. You're now holding the occiput, and with the other hand you're going to contact the sphenoid. When the occiput and sphenoid move into internal rotation or flexion, you're going to have an occiput that's going to move inward, I'm exaggerating the motion anatomically, towards the brainstem, and simultaneously your sphenoid is going to move down and in. So if you do this on your doll, you're going to feel that what you're doing is you're bringing both bones closer together. This is the internal rotation of the pumping or hydraulic system of the cranial mechanism. As the bones then move into extension, the sphenoid is going to move up, and the occiput is going to move back towards you. The two movements are going to be simultaneous. Now for every individual, whether it be newborn, from adolescence, childhood, all the way to old age, the movement and speed of each cycle can vary from one person to another. But we do know that the overall speed and amplitude is a term that we use in cranial osteopathy, which refers to the range of motion. So when you talk about the range of motion of an arm or a shoulder joint, we can also talk about the range of motion of each cranial bone, and we refer to that as amplitude. So if the amplitude or range of motion of the occiput and the sphenoid are full, we're going to have a good, strong flexion or internal rotation, and a good, strong, and long external rotation. Many newborn babies, due to the trauma that happens to the occiput at birth, which we saw earlier in previous chapters, happens in the occipital region. So therefore, often the occiput is either compacted or stuck in flexion. So we'll see in our future protocols the work that we're going to need to do to be able to release the occiput, its compression on the cranial nerves, and balancing this system.